Welcome everyone. My name is Sean, and today I want to talk about this Hill Rising segment that discusses Google's AI system, Gemini, and their image generation controversy. For those of you who are unaware of the basic story, it goes like this. Google makes this AI system. If you ask the AI to draw and or paint you a picture of something, then usually it's supposed to paint you a pretty damn accurate representation of said thing. However, if you ask this AI to paint you like something African, like an African king, you would get an African king. A Chinese king, you would get a Chinese king. But if you ask for anything related to Europeans or anything related to white people, you would get diversified options to the point where it's patently absurd and ridiculous. There are instances where people ask for like a French royal king and they would end up with a black female French royal, and that is just not correct, not accurate. There's a founding fathers thing where people said, draw me a picture of the United States founding fathers, and they ended up with black people, they ended up with people wearing turbans and all these diversified femaleized options, and this seemed like something rather weird that people noticed right away, and it got to the point where Google had to apologize for it. And the reason behind this is because the head of Google's AI team, the mastermind behind this Gemini system, is somebody who hates white people. So that bias was infused into this AI system. And considering that this technology could potentially be as revolutionary as the internet, if not more so, our entire economy could be somewhat connected to AI in the future, the fact that these big tech companies are programming their anti-white hatred in said technology has really troubling implications going into the future. But that's been covered by other people. That's been talked about in great detail. What I want to talk about is the fact that Bree tries to gaslight Robbie throughout the whole course of this segment, deny the issue because, like many left-wingers, if a topic is uncomfortable, their answer is to pretend it doesn't exist while at the same time supporting it. Now, before I do, I want to say thank you to everybody who signed up on actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay.
And thank you to the podcast listeners, Spotify, Apple, and Google's podcasting platform.
Well, according to much of the online discourse from yesterday, Google's new Gemini AI has officially joined HAL 9000, Skynet, and that evil wheel from WALL-E in the pantheon of artificial intelligence run amok. Conservative commentators, but not just conservative commentators, were blasting Google over what they described as intentional anti-white bias in its new AI generative engine, Gemini. Several images of users asking the engine to create images of people from traditionally white nationalities and backgrounds, such as French or Swedish or English, would produce images of black, brown, Asian, etc. people instead. But the reverse was not true. I played around with it a little bit. And I think, look, the issue for me is not that it creates implausible or historically inaccurate, when you said, make a...
historically inaccurate leprechauns?
It's kind of amazing how we get less historically accurate as technology advances, as we're supposed to getting more knowledge, because in reality and actuality, what Bree is saying right here about the pharaohs being a diverse cross-section of the world is not actually true. Most of the pharaohs are closely genetically related to the people that now make up modern-day Egyptians. In fact, modern-day Egyptians have more sub-Saharan African in them now than did the pharaohs of the past, and the reason we know this is due to genetic and DNA testing. Now, there are some notable different dynasties of pharaohs that existed throughout the history of ancient Egypt, and the one that these people never seem to focus on, because I guess they don't find it as notable, is the one that's actually a sub-Saharan African dynasty that ruled for about 100 years. Now, there's also a very notable other one, which descends from Alexander the Great's conquest of most of the known world, where one of his generals, when he died, ended up carving out his own kingdom in Egypt, and this was a Macedonian or Greek origin for the pharaohs. This is the Cleopatra dynasty, the people that are always often claimed by black Americans, even though, again, they're less African than the typical pharaohs because they're of Greek origin.
But when you asked for, French king, it gave you female portrayals and portrayals of people from all over the world, whatever. But then when you did it on, in the other direction, when you asked it for, like Egyptian pharaoh or Arab sultan or something, it showed you entirely accurate and did not diversify it any further.
What's the entirely accurate race of an Egyptian pharaoh?
African.
Seems like there were a lot of different races in ancient Egypt is kind of the point.
It showed you historically representative.
So a diverse array of people. as it did
saying?
in any context. I'm confused as to what the qualm.
What is confusing?
But of course, Bree has to be dumb right here and say, oh, the pharaohs were so diverse and all that. Nobody even knows what they look like. What's a historically accurate representation of the pharaohs? I mean, was Cleopatra Greek because, she's from a Macedonian dynasty? Or was she sub-Saharan African like that series being produced by Jada Pinkett Smith?
I remember my grandmother saying to me, I don't care what they tell you in school, Cleopatra was black.
Nobody knows the answer to this except everybody who's an expert relevant in the field, and you can't really say anything about that, and I'm going to use this to bog down the entire segment.
All of it, to be honest. I'm trying to find the root of the concern. It seems like they're making a new technology. They've defaulted to every result being diverse, so that there's...
No, they didn't. They did not default to every result being diverse. They defaulted to results that would be predominantly, by and large,
well, that's
white
why I'm
identities.
asking about the Egyptian example, because ancient Egypt, situated geographically where it was, had rulers of all different complexions.
Okay,
so this is another tactic that you get from left-wing gaslighters where they pretend to be confused. Right here, you're seeing Bree feign confusion. Robbie explained this in 2 minutes, the entire premise of this story, relatively simply. If you entered something from a minority culture, a minority in the United States of America, by the way, I know that Asia is actually the largest group of people in the entire world, but if you put Black King, Asian King, whatever, you would get results that represent that. If you did anything related to white people, you wouldn't. It's not confusing at all, and yet Bree is going to try to gaslight Robbie and say, oh, it's a new technology, oh, it's just some kind of confusion, and I'm so confused, I'm too stupid to follow this, wink wink, let's talk about something else, let's talk about problem B, because anything related to anti-whiteness is not an important topic, and I support it, by the way, so I don't want to discuss it.
Arab
Backgrounds.
Sultan or
Well, I don't know, you're the one that played with it. You brought up the ancient
Shogun
Egypt example.
or Aztec emperor or all of those
Well, what about
things.
them? Tell me what happens.
What you got is a stereotypical image of that thing in most of those cases. Again, it was not every single time.
So I give credit to Robbie right here because you're never going to convince Bree right now that the Egyptian example is a dumb example. So he moves on to Arab Sultan, and then he starts talking about Aztec rulers and all of that. And he's saying, well, you would get historically accurate representations there because this doesn't involve debating the we was pharaohs argument that you often get from black nationalist types in the United States of America. And then Bree's like, oh, but I don't know, you played with it, so I didn't see. Again, more feigning confusion and stupidity from Bree because she knows exactly what the issue is at hand.
Well, you're right. I understand now, Robbie. This is a catastrophe, and I'm so glad.
It's a catastrophe. It's just hilarious.
What can I say? Okay, it's hilarious, and I hope that the good people at the AI generator get right on it. It sounds from that Fox News quote that we read that they're all over it, and they're going to fix this problem as soon as possible, because I think it really is really bad to not be accurately representing European leaders the way that they should be represented.
So right here you have Bree saying, oh, well, this is no big deal. There's nothing to even talk about. There is no topic here. There is no conversation. I don't know why we're talking about this instead of something else, even though this is the topic. This is the topic of the segment. She should have been able to prepare for this topic. But of course, she pretends like Robbie just brought this up out of nowhere as if they didn't have a whole setup and intro for it in order to gaslight the audience into thinking that this is a situation that didn't occur. This reminds me of the whole Anna Kasparian issue with the transes or with crime, where the left would never go after her points on the merits of those points. They would instead scold her for talking about it. So right now, Bree is doing that exact same thing, saying it's not important to discuss this thing. This isn't even a topic worthy of knowing anything about. And that's the move that she's going to try to do. But then she's going to pivot to justifying it, which just goes to show you that this is the exact kind of person who would program an AI to spit out those anti-white results.
I know that there's a whole historical trajectory of European leaders and historical figures not being accurately identified as white, and we wouldn't want the public to be broadly deceived by that. And so I'm so glad that these AI generators are really getting quickly to the root of that problem.
So right there, she's like, oh, well, historically, this wasn't a problem, therefore, it's justified now, which is the exact philosophy of Ibram X. Kendi's let's be anti-racist by actively discriminating against white people as a form of revenge for racism in the past. This is what you're seeing right here. So Bree knows exactly what this story is about. She knows the exact premise. She knows the problem. She's not confused in any way, shape, shape, or form. She's just trying to gaslight this issue while also defending minorities, while also excusing this, saying, well, listen, the black people have been marginalized for so long, minorities have been marginalized for so long that this is fine. And honestly, it's kind of ridiculous that Google's even trying to fix this issue, because I don't know if you know this, white people are bad and white people are racist, and they should be kind of eradicated from history if you think about it. Like, it kind of is a good thing that when you search for a pope, again, typically a European position, that you get a black woman with the turban and a hijab to show you how diverse things actually are. That makes sense that we're programming this kind of bias into the system, and it makes sense that we will see other more subtle instances of this racial bias being programmed in. Because to be clear, people like Brie are not against racism. They're against white people. They're against Western society. They are anti everything about our civilization, and they just hide behind the idea of defending the oppressed, because in reality, people like her want to be oppressors. They want revenge for some kind of slight that they feel in their past, either real or imagined, either to them or to people that look like them. And this is all a part of that goal, and acknowledging that they're doing what they're doing undercuts that premise. So that's why they have to pretend like it doesn't exist.
You asked if I had seen this on my timeline. No, I hadn't. My timeline is largely occupied by pictures of limbless Palestinians, but also in the AI realm, there was a story about AI being used to have pornographic images of a podcast host, Bobby Altroff, that were trending either yesterday or the day before, that apparently were completely AI generated. And it was all over the timeline. Her name was trending. And so this is another one of those stories like the Taylor Swift story that we discussed, where there do seem to be some really significant privacy interests being violated here by software that can be used to put any famous person in any kind of unbecoming situation.
So this is a classic example of a known progressive deflection strategy, where somebody brings up a problem, and instead of acknowledging that, you bring up a different problem, because two wrongs makes a who cares. So she talks about, the Palestine, Gaza and all that. And it's like, oh, this is what I'm actually concerned with. Such a much more bigger deal and all of that. And then she deflects to this podcast host that had AI generated news or an AI generated adult content related to her, and how that's actually a much more serious issue. Now, to be clear, that is in a much more gray area than what's going on with Google. Google actively programmed this racial bias into their system, but the AI generated photorealistic images of real people in the nude, that is technically art. Like, you're technically making something that is not realistic, but it looks so realistic it could fool people. And Robbie actually goes down this rabbit hole with her and has a pretty good response to this point, which again is being brought up as a deflection from the overall premise of the story, that this is art, and then passing laws that try to regulate this are going to have more unintended consequences that create more problems down the line. And instead, what we should do is classify this under fraud when you're trying to represent something AI created as realistic.
I said when we talked about this earlier, I'm very cautious to create a new category of like impermissible content. I mean, if you're misrepresenting yourself as someone else, I think that's falling under like kind of fraud categories. But if it's clearly labeled parody, I mean, it's not
clearly labeled parody. It's not.
It's not.
It's labeled Bobby what's her face does a porn, and then it's all over the internet.
And it's plausible.
It looks real to me.
Oh, I didn't look. I don't know.
So that's I think a really significant issue. If you can't kind of fathom extending sympathy to a random podcaster who I don't even particularly care for, but she has rights and she's a human being, then imagine what if someone found a picture of your mother or your wife or your sister or your brother and made pornography with them. That is what keeps happening.
What if that's disgusting and gross, and we should shame whoever does that? I mean, what if somebody drew or painted that situation? It would be clearly protected
drawing.
Speech.
It would be a painting.
Is this different? I mean, that's what we're going to find out. It's maybe it is. I don't know that it is. I don't know that it's fundamentally different. But
now, I've said this before and I'll say it again. I think Robbie is actually a smart guy. I think he has smart points, and honestly, he countered every single rabbit hole, every single deflection that Brie wanted to take this story down. But the thing is, he should have never followed her down this rabbit hole. He should have stood up for the premise of the segment, called her out for playing dumb intentionally during the course of the segment, because by the time they work their way back to the topic, again, you have Brie mocking this idea, even though, again, this is racial bias being programmed into the AI. And if there was an AI that was created that programmed racial bias against black people, Bree would be crying into the camera like, oh my God, this is the most upsetting, oppressing story in the history of ever. But instead, he allows her to deflect this conversation to AI generated adult content, which again is important. It's interesting how we would look at that. I consider Robbie to be right that we have to examine this in the same way that we would examine fraud when you end up trying to use this to represent the actual person. But this could lead to more issues down the line and all of that. But fundamentally, having the AI be racially biased against white people or any group of people is also going to lead to problems in our society. And the fact of the matter is, people are going to be using this stuff more and more for research. People are going to be using this stuff more and more in order to support their arguments. And when the AI is subtly only having arguments and sources that back up the left-wing perspective, this is going to be a problem for dialogue going down the line. So yeah, this is a disaster in every possible way. This is something that is quite serious, and the people at Google, at these major tech companies, have no qualms about injecting their modern-day political biases into these systems for disastrous consequences, and it's only going to get worse in the future. And in the future, AI is going to be more sophisticated, so you're not going to be able to detect the lies as simply as this. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about Bree versus Robbie on the issue of AI. Till next time.